Today we're going to be talking about wheel spacers, specifically for your S550 and S650 Mustang, but this pretty much applies to any Mustang or any car if you're looking to add wheel spacers to your vehicle. Now, Jamie, what type of wheel spacers are there? Right now in front of us we have bolt-on, correct?
You have bolt-on spacers, you have slip-on spacers, and then you have bolt-on wheel adapters.
Now, in what particular applications would you use each one of those types of spacers?
Bolt-on spacers are good when you have your stock wheels and you're looking to change the fitment, move them out towards the fender openings a little bit more. You have a set of wheels that the offset is greater than the stock spacing and they sit in too far, move them back out. Slip-on spacers, that's typically used with extended wheel studs, mostly racing applications where you just don't want the extra hassle of the bolt-on spacer. And wheel adapters, they're really not recommended for anything except staying on the shelf.
Exactly. So first, the bolt-on wheel spacers. This is probably the most common wheel spacer you're going to see out there, especially for street applications. Occasionally you'll see them on track cars as well. There's a little bit more maintenance involved with them, but this is the everyday wheel spacer for the typical Mustang enthusiast. Now, Jamie, tell us a little bit more about why people prefer these on the street and why you even see them sometimes on track.
You've got a set of wheels that have an offset that's specifically for the rear, and it's usually 19, 20, 25, 30 millimeter difference than the front. And to make a rear fitment wheel work on the front, you're going to need a wheel spacer. People do it for a lot of different reasons, mostly to have a matching front to rear wheel combination where they can rotate their tires. They do it because their existing wheels were set up that way. Some of the staggered wheel fitments have different offsets, and trying to mix and match, they work really well for that.
Now, for track use, why would you see a bolt-on spacer?
A lot of the same reason. Some of the wheel companies, the popular wheel companies for their track wheels, they make the larger width wheels in large increments of offset. So you're going to have a wheel that's going to, let's say, has a 52 millimeter offset. Works great on the back of a S550, S650, even S197s.
And like you mentioned, a lot of people like to use the rear fitment all the way around so they could get that rotation. For example, our Trident wheels, they're a 19 by 11 inch wheel with that 53 millimeter offset. In order to run that up front, what's happening if you don't use a wheel spacer?
Well, it's not going to bolt on to the hub because the wheel sets too far back and it's actually up against the strut. And the wheel spacer gives you the room to push it back out to where it clears the strut and still gives you the ability to turn without scrubbing the inside of the fender well.
Exactly, and if you're looking at a 53 millimeter offset and you add a 20 millimeter spacer up front, you're going to change that 53 millimeter offset to effectively a 33 millimeter offset, which is much more in tune of what's required on the front end of these S550s and S650s. Now we have our Steeda 1-inch hub-centric spacers in front of us. Jamie, tell us why it's a great option for those that are looking for the street spacer upgrade or even for the track.
Well, to start with, they're hub-centric. They line up to the hub itself, and they're also hub-centric for the wheel side as well, so that everything lines up properly to the hub. If you were using what are called lug nut centric spacers, that the seat of the lug nut actually centers the wheel and the spacer, you can have issues where the wheel doesn't run true anymore, and that'll induce vibration and different handling issues to the car. Also introduces a failure point.
And simply, hub-centric makes things a little bit more user-friendly. There's less margin for error and frankly, overall safer.
They're a lot safer. They're a lot simpler to use. It cuts out the chances of doing something wrong because they're only going to fit one way.
Right. Next up, slip spacers. Where exactly would you want to use a slip spacer? I know typically you see them more on track than you would on the street. Why is that, Jamie?
You see them a lot more on race applications, especially road race and track cars. Once you get to a certain power level and speed, it's a safer option because you're using a higher grade wheel stud, extended wheel stud, and when you're torquing the wheels, you don't have the extra studs involved that leads to extra maintenance. You just slide on the spacer that you need, torque your wheel, and you're good. You don't have to worry about multiple retorquings. Depending on how that slip-on spacer is made, there's some of them that have really big windows. They're meant for a 1/4 inch or less of spacer. The race grade, track grade spacers, they fit the studs really tight, and most of them, as these are hub-centric, so they properly align the wheel to the hub and the spacer. So it takes that chance of having run-out problems away.
And one thing that's very important to note is with the slip spacers, most times, depending on the width of the spacer, you're going to need to add those extended studs in order to run it. The idea of a bolt-on spacer is that you can run it with stock studs, with the exception of 20 millimeter on some of those S550 and S650 Mustangs, depending on how your car is optioned. But again, with the slip-on spacer, you need that extended stud in order to be able to run it.
Also, you have to have the open-ended lug nuts, and a lot of the street guys don't like the open-ended lug nuts. They don't fit the look they're going for on their car. But for the track guys, open-ended lug nuts, you know how much thread you've got engaged.
Exactly.
It's a quick safety check that you can see that, that they're properly, that they're all on there. They're all torqued properly.
Exactly. Now, moving on to wheel adapters. Now, why exactly do you not recommend them, Jamie?
With the wheel adapters, you have so many problems that can come up from the spacing between the studs that are already there. Frankly, the quality of them is not that good. A lot of them aren't hub-centric, and if you're changing the bolt pattern of your wheel, you can run into offset issues. There's just too many problems that come up with trying to run wheel adapters. You should probably just, like I said before, leave them on the shelf.
For sure. Now let's talk about some really important notes when it comes to installation, specifically with bolt-on spacers. Slip-ons, relatively simple. Just make sure you have those extended studs properly installed, and then it's basically just like putting on a wheel as if a spacer wasn't there. But with the bolt-on spacers, some people do say that these get a bad rep. Why exactly are there so many myths around wheel spacers, and what do people need to keep in mind from a safety standpoint?
One of the first things that can happen with them that can be a point of failure is not properly cleaning your hub surface and rotor surface before you put them on. It's really important that they sit flat against the rotor and the hub. Otherwise, you're going to have a run-out problem. The other thing is not properly torquing the spacer to the hub. They need to be torqued the same way that the wheels are torqued. All of our S550, S650 spacers, the spacer needs to be torqued to the hub at 150 pounds, just like the wheel goes on. It just cuts out the chance of one of the lug nuts coming loose. It just makes everything a little bit safer.
And like Jamie said, these are things you want to make sure you check periodically after you've installed them, especially if you plan on doing performance driving like an HPD event or track event. You should be checking the torque of your bolt-on wheel spacers frequently to make sure everything's safe.
When you add anything to your car, aftermarket parts, you're adding maintenance. Not checking the torque afterwards is probably the second biggest failure. They can come loose during normal driving. Recommended maintenance is after the first 500 miles of street use. You should pull the wheels off and check the torque on your spacer to make sure that it is still properly torqued.
So besides installation in and of itself, what are some other things that people should be looking out for when they're shopping for wheel spacers on their vehicle?
When you're looking to buy wheel spacers, if you're looking for it to be a bolt-on application, you need to shy away from any of the cast wheel spacers. Go with Billet. The Billet wheel spacers are stronger, they'll last longer. You're not going to have cracking issues, stud pull through. They just eliminate a lot of the problems going with the Billet.
And just like anything else, you do get what you pay for, so do your research. The Billet aluminum ones, like the ones we have in front of us, are the best way to go when it comes to bolt-on wheel spacers. Now, Jamie, what are some of the issues that you can run into when installing wheel spacers on your vehicle?
One of the first issues you can run into is if you got the wrong size spacer for your wheel application in the car. It's too thick, it's too thin. That can be a big problem on trying to get everything to fit. The second problem is the length of your factory wheel studs and the type and style of wheel that you're running. If it doesn't have a recessed pocket on the back face of the wheel, the factory studs can actually go past the spacer enough that it can interfere with the installation of the wheel. And that is something that the installer, the car owner, needs to be aware of. If you're putting on like a 19 millimeter spacer, the factory stud can stick out far enough to hit the wheel, and when it does, you're not going to be able to properly torque the wheel to the spacer. You can damage wheel spacer, the car itself. I mean, it can become a huge safety issue.
So how do you check and make sure that the actual wheel stud isn't crashing against the back of the wheel?
The quickest, simplest way is with modeling clay such as Play-Doh. Just put it on the pockets on the back of the wheel. If it has them, put the wheel up to the hub, see if it touches. If it does, the ends of the studs need to be ground down. If the wheel doesn't have pockets, it's a flat-faced hub seat, then if the studs stick out past the spacer, they're going to need to be ground down. It's a simple process. You can do it with a hand grinder. Just make sure that the factory lug nut's going to come back off, that you don't grind them in such a way that you damage the threads. But yeah, it's the best way to make sure that they fit properly.
Now, it is safe to say when it comes to certain trim levels and combinations of wheels and tires, Magnerite, etc., on S550, S650 Mustangs, that the 20 millimeter spacer that we offer may require trimming of the studs. This is why you need to make sure you check with the modeling clay or Play-Doh that you're not having any issues with either your factory wheel or the aftermarket wheel you plan to run. But when it comes to S550 and S650, our 1-inch spacers are great across the board. So with that said, if you have any questions, we have our customer service team ready to answer your call. We love talking about wheel spacers and getting you set up with the right combination. And when you're ready to make that jump to the wheels, we have those too. So hit us up right here at Steeda.com for all of your Mustang and Ford performance part needs. Comment below and let us know if you have any questions regarding wheel spacers or anything related. Jamie and I both check the comments periodically. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe, that notification bell, and don't forget the most important thing.
Speed matters.